that says we're moving forward. So I want to know, as well as my group, where are we moving? How are we moving? Do we have the information that we should have in place, permits, and whatever else is necessary to move forward with this project? I'd like to have some answers as to whether we have those, and if this date of starting March 2016 is the actual date it's going to start. We need to know those dates. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bradley. Ms. Bradley, if you give your questions to our clerk, she'll distribute them to the appropriate departments and get your answers. Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Kit Smith. Ms. Smith, if you'll come forward, state your name and address for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Kit Smith. I'm at 120 Edisto Avenue, Richland County, South Carolina. And it's glad to be back. I know that you have on your agenda item number 18, I think it is, concerning the waiver of tipping fees in order to help us improve Gonzales Garden. And I came just to encourage you to give that favorable consideration. I wanted to share with you just a personal experience that I had. Many of you, well, probably some of you, don't remember the Volkswagen ads from way back when they would park the Volkswagen and people would just keep coming out of them. They'd come up through the manhole and it'd be like, instead of 4 people, it'd be like 300 people would climb out. Well, I remember Milton Pope saying that whenever we had a problem in the county, we'd blame it on what happened when they moved people from Henley Homes. It's like, where did all these people come from? They're causing all the problems. And I wanted just to share with you that when I left council, I began doing more volunteer work and got away from being an advocate for policy change and more an advocate for individuals. I started doing some work at St. Anna's Park, which is a small park that backs up to Gonzales Garden. And for the first time, I got to know a lot of these folks who are my neighbors. And my conclusion is that the people are not the problem. The place is the problem. Every time you have a clean sweep in Richland County and we start trying to clean up a neighborhood, that's where basic decency begins. And people start taking pride in where they live and start building a real community. Most of the bad element that we hear about from the crime that is committed in or around Gonzales Garden is not the residents. And I would invite you to take a tour if you have not, or meet some of the folks who've lived there, like a good friend of mine, Miss Dabney Faust, who had to move out. She didn't want to move. She's got small children. She would be here tonight, but she couldn't get a babysitter. But she had to move because the mold was so bad. We don't need people to live like that, and I hope that you will challenge your colleagues on City Council to do the right thing and help us make a great, decent place for these folks to live. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Smith.
And in honor of Mr. Malinowski's jacket, I'm going to go home and watch the Gamecocks.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. That concludes our citizens' input. Next, we will have the report of the county administrator, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of council. Item A, I don't believe Mr. Smith mentioned those, but these are 2 employee, and it's 2 rather than 3, but 2 employee grievances. If you have questions about those or would like to discuss them, we usually do that in executive session. Otherwise, if you are okay, and we did send the information out to you under separate cover, if the council is okay with the reports that we sent, if you would just take a vote to accept those, we would appreciate it.
Chairman, I have a question about one of the 2.
Okay.
Okay. We will do those in executive session then, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman. Second item for me, Mr. Chairman, as we have done a couple of times before, we have with us tonight the new class of the Richland Penny Transportation Program summer interns. And again, this was part of the whole program initially, was to involve students in the program, get them some practical experience while they're in school. And rather than me trying to introduce them to you myself, I'm going to ask, as we've done before, that each of them introduces himself or herself, tell you what school he or she is attending and what program or major they are pursuing.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sierra Grant. I'm a civil engineer at the University of South Carolina.
Good evening. My name is Mohammed Abdi. I'm an electrical and physics engineer at Benedict College.
Good evening, County Councilman and Chairman Tory Rush. I'm Tatiana Taylor. I am a graduate from Benedict College. I majored in transportation engineering and logistics studies.
Good evening. My name is Elmer Guerrero. I'm an electrical engineering student at the University of South Carolina.
Okay. Well, welcome to the program and best of luck. I hope you, will enjoy the program and all the practical experience that you'll get from it. So,
Great. And thank you all for being here tonight. And Mr. Chairman, that, other than the personnel matter, completes my report, and that last item we'll do an executive session.
all right. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Next, we have the report of the Clerk of Council.
Good evening,
Ms.
Mr.
McDaniel.
Chairman and members of council. I just wanted to remind you about the legislative reception that will be on March the 2nd at the Columbia Metropolitan Convention Center from 5:30 to 7:30, and that is Wednesday, March 2nd. That concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Ms. McDaniels. Next, we have the report of the chair. I've got one item is A and B is actually combined. I want to first of all commend Mr. Madden, Brandon Madden, our research manager, for doing such a good job as it relates to his legislative work, working with our both our state and federal lobbyists. I think he's done a great job of bringing the information back to us and sort of coordinating those efforts. Just to speak to it briefly, some recent updates that we've had. Some discussions with the U.S. Department of HUD, Julian Castro, outlining the impact of the flood to Richland County and how we're asking for a direct allocation from HUD. They received $300 million in CDBG dollars, and we're trying to actually go after a direct allocation. We've sent a letter on behalf of the county to HUD. We've had conversations with HUD. We had a conference call with myself, staff, and Vice Chairman Pierce on Thursday, I think, on Thursday, concerning, no, it was last Tuesday, I think it was. It was last Tuesday concerning the direct allocation, and I thought it was a good conversation. I will say they have not made a determination of when they will make those allocations, but we'll continue to work with our delegation, both state and federal congressional delegation, as we continue to try to find funds for the flood recovery. In addition to that, we've had last week on the 5th, we met the lobbyists, Tetra Tech, and staff met with state delegation. Myself, Mr. McDonald, and Mr. Pierce also met with individuals in the state legislators concerning our local government fund, flood recovery, and all the other issues pertaining to Richland County. We will be setting up another meeting to meet with the additional members that are part of the House Ways and Means Committee as well. So that, unless there's any questions concerning those issues, that concludes my report. All right, next we'll have the approval of consent items, item 13 through 15.
Approve, Mr. Chair.
All right, got a motion for approval. It's been properly seconded. Any discussion? All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Next, we have third reading item 16. Mr. Washington.
And I apologize to my colleagues. I need to defer that item again. There are some concerns that came up with that item with regard to the buffering, and I have yet to get clarity on that. So, motion for deferral.
Okay, I got a motion for deferral. It's been item 16.
16.
Got a motion for deferral. It's been properly seconded. Deferral is non-debatable. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Next, we have item 17, second reading items. An ordinance authorizing the First Amendment of certain inducements and millage rate agreement and lease agreement by and between Richland County, South Carolina, Coyo Bearings North America LLC, relating to, without limitations, the extension of the term of the project.
Mr. Chair, move approval.
I got a motion for approval. It's been properly second. Any discussion? All in favor of that motion signify by raising your hand.
Favor, Malinowski, Rose, Dixon, Jackson, Pierce, Rush, Livingston, Dickerson, Washington, Manning, Jeter.
Okay, any opposed, like sign? That motion carries. Item 18, an ordinance allowing the temporary waiver of building permits, fees, and plan review fees for homeowners, contractors, and volunteer organizations active in disasters, allowing the temporary waiver of business license fees for contractors and volunteer organizations active in the disaster.
Move for approval.
Got a motion for approval. It's been properly second. Any discussion? All in favor of that motion signify by raising your hand.
In favor, Rose, Malinowski, Dixon, Jackson, Pierce, Rush, Livingston, Dickerson, Washington, Manning, Jeter.
Any opposed, like sign? That motion carries. Next, we have the report of the Development and Service Committee. Ms. Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item number 19. Reconsider request from the Columbia Housing Authority to waiver tipping fees at the Richland County landfill for demolition debris from the Gonzalez Garden Apartment Complex. That information is found on page 53 to 158. Committee had made recommendation to forward this to council without any recommendation. Mr. McDonald.
Mr. McDonald.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this item was, as Ms. Dixon stated, was forwarded to the council without a recommendation. I believe the reason for that was that at the time that it was forwarded from committee, there was no agreement or intergovernmental agreement or IGA in the agenda packet itself, and the direction was that that document be prepared, which it has been done. And if you look on page 54 of your agenda, you will see a motion which the legal department also drafted, and then beginning on page 55 is the intergovernmental agreement itself. And just as a quick reminder, what both the motion and the IGA provide is that any participation in the project, even though ours would be in-kind service, but it would be contingent on the City of Columbia and City Council appropriating the $1 million that the city has indicated that it will commit to the project, and will do that through its budget process. So all of that will be contingent, or all of the county's participation will be contingent on the city moving forward and actually adopting a budget that includes the $1 million for the city's participation.
Okay. I have Mr. Livingston, Mr. Washington,
Mr.
and
Move
Melanis. I got a motion for approval. It's been properly second. Discussion. Mr. Washington.
Thanks, Mr. McDonald. And I want to thank Mr. Walker. I received communication from him about the residents and their placement and the possibility of them benefiting to move back in that community. I am satisfied from his response, and I appreciate what you're doing. Thanks again.
Okay, Mr. Malinowski. I have you, Ms. Dixon.
I think you were first.
Yeah.
Okay.
My question is, if, with the MOU that we have in front of us, maybe you're calling it the IGA, it seems like everything in the motion is contained in there. So if we pass that, what's the need for the motion? We've got it all right there.
You're absolutely right, Mr.
That's all.
Malinowski. I think the motion was actually drafted before the IGA or before the MOU.
So we just need to approve
was.
that IGA then.
But yeah, I think the key document is the IGA, because the motion really kind of gives the authority to move forward with the IGA or MOU.
Okay, and in reviewing the IGA, I can't say what page you have because you've been given amended agendas, but I'll just say it is on the second page of the IGA, number 5. It does not, I think it needs to reiterate the amount of funds again in that section. I spoke with Mr. Smith earlier. And he said that I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I believe he did agree with me on that.
Yeah, that's paragraph number 5.
Correct.
That's on page 57.
Yeah, 57. Are you done, Mr. Malinowski?
And, but that would just be a friendly amendment to this IGA, that we can reiterate the dollar amount.
You accept that friendly
Yes.
amendment? Okay.
Okay, and that's on the next page. Well, let's see. Actually, it's going to be page 2 of the IGA, 3, subletter B. The last line where it tells about what the county's going to do with the materials, and subletter C. Again, the last line where it says what the county's going to do with some of these materials. I do not think that's pertinent to the IGA. We're getting the stuff. We're taking it as an in-kind service. I think we're kind of limiting ourselves, especially in subletter C, by saying we're only going to use it for 2 items, which are roads and stormwater conveyances. What if we want to use it for a parking lot or a sidewalk or something? I don't think we need those, that's all. That's just my personal opinion, but other than that,
And Mr. Chair, I'm okay with those being removed too. That
Okay.
means you can do them or not do them. You still have flexibility.
There you go, and other than that, I concur with everything else in there, thank you.
And Mr. Washington, you second that as well? All right.
And that language is not necessarily conveying the agreement between the parties, so it's,
Okay. All right.
so we can do those.
All right.
Make those changes. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Malinowski?
I'm done, thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you, Mr. Malinowski. Ms. Dickerson?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to say I've had contact with the Columbia Housing Authority regarding this matter. And I think Ms. Smith put it in its proper context for me earlier when she said that there was mold and mildew in those apartments. And this is one of the indications that is disturbing to me. The flood brought it out when I had to go into a lot of homes and look at the conditions of the inside of these homes that are managed by this organization. And that's what I found, a lot of mold. It wasn't just in Gonzalez Gardens. They are all over the place. And when I went in places, apartments, homes, and saw all this mold and mildew, that tells me that somebody is not managing these properties well. Because if that's the case, if I lived in one and told someone that they need to come in and inspect these places and making sure that they are livable, why do we allow them to get in such condition without taking care of them before they got to this place? So I'm going to support it, but I want people to know that houses, Columbia Housing Authority got houses scattered all throughout this area. And I guarantee you, if you go in a lot of them, you're going to find a lot of problems in them. So with the tipping fee, the MOU is fine. I'm fine with that. The adjustments that were made, I'm fine with that. But I want to say, when I read the paper and it said, well, it wasn't just for mold and mildew. According to the paper, it said the residents were not taxpayers, and that this would be, once they build that, it would be a tax base for the city. So I just want to say that, but I am going to support it. I want to go on record by saying we need to check all the rest of the houses and see whether or not they also have mold, mildew, and in bad conditions. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Dickerson. Any more discussion? All in favor of that motion signify by raising your hand.
In favor, Rose, Malinowski, Dixon, Jackson, Pierce, Rush, Livingston, Dickerson, Washington, Manning, Jeter.
Any opposed, like sign? That motion carries.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Dixon, yeah.
do we need to move to reconsider this, or is this a
Do we need to
reading
clench?
item?
Is this
This is one reading.
one reading? Okay, I got a motion for reconsideration. It's been properly second. Discussion, all in favor of reconsideration signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Nay. That motion fails. All right, Ms. Dixon.
That concludes the report for Development and Service Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dixon. Next, we have the report of Rules and Appointments Committee, Mr. Malinowski.
Chair, notification of appointments, the Lexington Richland Alcohol and Drug Abuse Council. There are 2 vacancies. The committee unanimously recommends to appoint L. Laverne Buddy Wilson Jr., and Latanya Derrick.
Okay, you heard the committee's, recommendation. Discussion, Mr. Livingston.
No, there are no incumbents in this go-around.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any more discussion? All in favor of that motion signify by raising your hand.
In favor, Malinowski, Dixon, Jackson, Pierce, Rush, Livingston, Dickerson, Manning, Jeter.
Any opposed, like sign? That motion carries. Mr. Malinowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item number 21, the Business Service Center Appeals Board. That was deferred in committee in order to have some new language drafted relating to the ordinance, and then the committee will provide that to the full council. Item number 22, the Music Festival Commission. One vacancy, and the committee recommends to appoint Dolores Moselle. And you see the spelling, Mosesel, which is correct, but she pronounces it Moselle.
Okay. Here are the committee's recommendation. Any discussion? All in favor of that motion signify by raising your hand.
Malinowski, Dixon, Jackson, Rush, Livingston, Dickerson, Manning, Jeter.
Any opposed, like sign? That motion carries. Mr. Malinowski.
Item number 23. Well, it may not be 23 on the agenda. The next item is the terms of service. That was held in committee. And just for information of the council, the committee, in an effort to be more systematic in the way that we operate, has set aside the first Tuesday of each month for interviews of applicants to boards, committees, and commissions, and the third Tuesday of each month for other council matters that come before the committee. We realize it seems like we're constantly doing interviews and not getting to the motions that council members are presenting to us, so that's what the committee has recommended we're going to do for some in-house housekeeping.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Malinowski.
That concludes my report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Malinowski. Next, we have the report of the Transportation Ad Hoc Committee. Mr. Livingston.
Mr. Chair, item 24A, a sidewalk package, S2, Shelter Market Construction Award. On page 180 in your agenda, you will find the outcome of bids received to construct sidewalks on Maple Street, located in District 6, and Mildred Avenue, located in District 4. This is the Shelter Market contract sold for SLBE contractors, and the low bidder, CBD Incorporated, is a certified SLBE with Richland County. This contract has 100% SLBE participation, and the recommendation of the Transportation Ad Hoc Committee is for approval in the amount of $158,690.40 with a 10% contingency fee.
You heard the committee's recommendation. Any discussion? All in favor of that motion signify by raising your hand.
In favor, Rose, Malinowski, Dixon, Jackson, Pierce, Rush, Livingston, Dickerson, Manning, Jeter.
Any opposed, like sign? That motion carries. Mr. Livingston.
Mr. Chair, item 24B of sidewalk package S4 Shelter Market Construction Award. Again, beginning on page 200 of your agenda, you will find the outcome of bids received to construct sidewalks on Wiley Street, located in District 10. This is the Shelter Market contract sold for SLB contractors, and the low bidder, Orange Construction Company, is a certified SLBE in Richland County. This contract has 100% SLBE participation. The recommendation is to award the contract to CBD Incorporated for $81,252.50 with a 10% contingency fee, and the committee's recommendations for approval.
You heard the committee's recommendation. Any discussion? All in favor of that recommendation signify by raising your hand.
In favor, Rose, Malinowski, Dixon, Jackson, Pierce, Rush, Livingston, Dickerson, Manning, Jeter.
Any opposed, like sign? That motion carries. Mr. Livingston.
Mr. Chair, that completes the report of the Transportation Ad Hoc Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Livingston. Next, we have the report of the Blue Ribbon Advisory Committee. That committee met on Thursday, February 11th at 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Mr. Pierce and I attended this meeting. There's a list of organization and community representatives on page 217 of your council packet. Staff updated the community members on various items such as the summary of the flood impact, the status of the well testing and disinfection program, the phases of flood recovery, short-term, intermediate, and long-term, the Midlands Long-Term Recovery Group, which is a group of governmental and nonprofit and other organizations working on flood recovery efforts. The Blue Ribbon Committee was informed of 2 sources of state and federal money that can be used for flood recovery. One is the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. That's money from the state of South Carolina. Richland County is competing with all other affected areas in the state for a total of $36 million. The deadline for that grant and the submission of pre-application is April the 5th, 2016. We also discussed the Community Development Block Grant, disaster recovery funds, money from the federal government that can be used to address flood recovery. This money is expected to be released in the next 1 to 2 months. The first action item for the committee that is on tonight's agenda relates to the criteria Richland County will utilize to develop its priorities to apply for state hazard mitigation grant program. There are 10 priority rank criteria listed in your council package on page 214. These are broad criteria that will be used to develop specific activities for state funds. The first item is the committee recommends that council approves the 10 priority ranked criteria for prioritization of the application for hazard mitigation grant program.
Mr. Chair,
Yep.
I'll make a motion for approval for discussion.
Okay, I got a motion for approval. Wait a minute. No, well, the committee recommends the approval, so discussion. Mr. Washington.
All right. Who's staffing this, Ms. McDonald?
Mr. Bronson.
Good evening, Council. Kevin Bronson, Assistant County Administrator.
So these criteria, is this coming from the state?
The 10 ranked criteria you have were developed by county staff. We presented them to the Blue Ribbon Committee. County staff developed these criteria based off of the state's ranked criteria and how they have, they're currently advertising to use the state mitigation funds.
So the state, they have the similar 10 items on their criteria list?
No, sir, they do not. They have broader categories in how they intend to use the funds.
So these items fall within those categories?
Yes, sir.
All right. Have you all assigned weights to any of these 10 thus far?
Only to say that these staff recommended it to the Blue Ribbon Committee, and the committee is recommending it to you that they go in this order that you see before you.
So the 1, 2, 3 is the ranking, but you don't have any weights assigned?
Correct. So the next step, Mr. Washington, would be at the next Blue Ribbon Committee meeting, which will be scheduled for this Thursday, staff has developed projects that fall within each one of these categories or within each one of these criteria.
Well, help me first. All right. So residential acquisition would be considered the first, I guess, the first swipe at. So you have a set of dollars.
Yes.
So then residential will have first priority of getting those dollars.
Yes, sir. We do not believe the amount this totals to would exceed the amount that we would be able to ask.
Say that again, please.
So the amount that we believe that the property buyouts would not exceed the amount that we could ask the state for.
So if you have a resident, because I'm looking at stormwater drainage management, housing reconstruction, rehab, and then you got non-residential property acquisition, then at number 10, replace county emergency operations center. So the county, to receive the dollars, they have to have a plan to replace the EOC as well?
No, sir. So the way this would eventually work itself out is as the committee continues to meet, the next meeting, they will consider items that are a bit more specific, like under number 1, the number of houses that are eligible and could be bought out. Under number 2, specific actions to address stormwater drainage, et cetera, going all the way down. Staff has developed actionable items with dollar amounts that we'll recommend to the Blue Ribbon Committee to consider, to then recommend to you. If you approve those, then those are the funds that we would apply for to the state.
All right, the flood study on number 6, that is an item that you need to do a study to do these other items?
Not necessarily. So flood studies, we encountered flooding that surpassed the floodplain and got into a much broader area. And as a result, we believe that it's necessary to go back and further study the watersheds, the flow of the water. So when we have an event as large as the one we encountered in October, that we're better prepared to manage that water flow. That's what those activities would
No,
generally
I understand the logic, but you're going to do a flood study. If you're going to use this criteria, this is where I'm getting at. You're going to use the existing data to categorize which homes are in the floodway, but a lot of this stuff is shifted. A lot of tributaries have shifted.
Yes.
So my logic would be you do the flood study, hydrology study, before you even start looking at these different criteria.
Well, on the, if I could go back to the first item, the homes, or the properties, I should say, that are eligible for buyout are known properties. They're not going to shift as a result of an additional study. They're based off of the FEMA standards in how the houses were affected through the flood.
But once y'all get the matrix and whatever weight you all put on these items,
yes,
I would like to see that ahead of time.
Okay.
Well ahead of time, instead of just dropping it to council. All right? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. Mr. Malinowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bronson, so we're going to be getting, from what I'm understanding, more details and specifics for each one of these 10 items after the next meeting?
Yes, sir.
Number 2, stormwater drainage management, including dams. Isn't that a DHEC matter?
Dams are regulated by the Department of Health and Environmental Control. In the recommendation from staff to the Blue Ribbon Committee, we did not include dams. That parenthetical, or that
Right.
parentheses that you see there was recommended to be added by the Blue Ribbon Committee.
And just to clarify that as well, even during that process, we did inform them that there's more details we have to look into as it relates to dams. Although we will add it to review it, there are other things we have to look into with that
Okay,
process.
because I just didn't see how we could put something down that we can handle if it's not under our jurisdiction. So, also on your list of the entities under community, and you've got a couple places that say citizen, but we don't have anything as to where these people are from. We've got a couple names, but I mean, we don't have any address or the community they're from. If we could get that information, please. And I'd like to know how and why these individuals were chosen.
I can tell you generally how
You don't
we...
have to tell me now and take up time.
Okay, yes,
You
sir.
can just send it to me. Thank you, Mr.
All right,
Chair.
thank you, Mr. Malinowski. Any more discussion? All in favor of that motion signify by raising your hand.
Malinowski, Dixon, Jackson, Pierce, Rush, Livingston, Dickerson, Washington.
Any opposed, like sign? That motion carries. The second item, the second action item for the committee on the agenda is the notification of property owners whose properties meet the eligibility requirement to be purchased through the hazard mitigation program listed in your council package on page 215 and 216. The committee recommends that council approves staff, county council approves staff to proceed with the distribution of the notice of volunteer interest forms. All buyouts are voluntary a property owner must agree to have their eligible property purchased under this program.
Move approval, and I'd like to speak to the motion.
The motion is for approval.
Second.
Discussion. Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
I got you.
During the discussion of the well situation, Mr. Washington brought up and educated us on some of the problems that we're having getting approval. And so I wanted to point out to Mr. Washington that the Blue Ribbon Commission did go beyond sending them, just sending these folks a letter, that we talked about the fact that many of them would need to be contacted. Ms. Scott was there representing the Lower Richland area, and any of those rural folks that may need direct contact will receive that.
Yes, sir.
Rather than just send them a letter saying, hey, we're going to buy your house.
Right.
Or we want to buy your house, or we have to buy your house. So very sensitive to that you brought that to our attention during the well discussion. So that was discussed.
I appreciate it.
Okay, Mr. Washington.
Quick question on mitigation. Is it going to be the homes that are in the floodway that's going to trigger you contacting them? Who's going to be that trigger of the homes you contact? Is it the latest flood maps that you're going to be utilizing?
It is homes that have substantial damage that were in the floodplain. Did I get the floodplain right? Yes, I did. It is homes that have substantial damage within the floodplain. So, to clarify a little bit more, Mr. Washington, there are 63 residential structures and 15 non-residential structures.
Substantially damaged.
That's 50% or more.
51% of value, something like that.
If we have to get much deeper than that, Mr. Washington, I'll have to ask Andrew Bullen to come and talk.
All right, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Mr. Washington. Any more discussion? Committee recommendations for
One
approval.
reading item.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to make a motion to defer because I want to get more information on this.
Can I ask you staff a question regarding that? In terms of, I'm just concerned about the need to move forward for these folks. And much of this, really, we're not making any final decisions on anything other than a lot of this going to have to come back before us anyway. Stick with the criteria and all that kind of stuff.
For the mitigation part, we're only going to use, I don't know what the definition of substantial. There are a lot of homes now that are in the floodway. And I know it's more than 60 homes that
Yes, sir.
sit in our floodway.
I'm sorry for interrupting. I'm going to have Ms. Bullen come down and give you a little bit more history of what substantial
Ms. Bullen, if you can
damage.
state your name and position, please.
But if I may say before she speaks, Mr. Washington, we know there are homes that were damaged that will not meet these criteria for this pot of money. This is state mitigation money. We believe that there are a broader homes that were damaged in a broader sense that we'll be able to address through the Community Development Block Grant disaster recovery money. This is just for the state hazard mitigation money.
For the substantially damaged homes.
Yes,
For
sir.
the ones beyond that are in the floodway, there are additional dollars for them.
We believe we can address those with the CDBG DR funds.
And the criteria for those funds are based on the flood maps.
Do you know the answer to that question?
For this,
Tell them your name.
hi, I'm Andrea Bowling, Richland County Floodplain Manager. Just to make sure I understand your question, the properties that are in the floodway are also included in that 63 total properties. So it includes everything in the floodway and then the fringe, which is the entire floodplain. So those would be
Beyond substantial damage.
not less than substantially damaged. So substantially damaged is if your structure is worth $100,000 and it costs $51,000 to repair, more than 50% of that structure value, you're substantially damaged, which means you would have to come to current flood code. So if it only costs $49,000, then you're not substantially damaged. And you can come in and get your building permit and move forward with your repair work. So that's where the line was drawn in establishing these criteria.
But based on what you're saying, Kevin, is that the state dollars will cover that.
That
and
is-
there's CBG dollars to cover anybody else that's in the floodplain.
That is what we're looking at moving forward with, yes, sir.
Got it. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Washington. Mr. Livingston.
I think my question's been answered, Chair.
Mr. Jackson.
Just want to move forward.
What about houses that has to be elevated?
And those would be your substantially damaged houses.
Okay.
At this point, we suggested to just move forward with the acquisition, which completely removes the risk. It would be something if a homeowner, comes back and says, no, I don't want to sell, can we look at that as an option? I'm sure that the work group would take that back in and send it back to the Blue Ribbon Committee. But at this point, we haven't had any specific homeowners come and request assistance with elevation that I've been made aware of.
Okay, I know there have been some call and concern because, especially into Mr. Washington's district, had called me, and the concern was that to pay for demolition, then they had to build a house approximately 5 foot above, elevated 5 foot higher, and that was a tremendous cost.
And some of those, if we acquire the structure, it would be acquiring the land as well. So they wouldn't be moving forward with building that. But if it is someone who is on that list, and I think I know of one of the streets that may be of a concern on right now, if those are folks who are looking to do that, I'm sure that would be something that would come back to the work group after having those discussions, once we can officially find out by using this form.
Okay, I know you'll have those discussions because a lot of people has lived in the communities for their entire life, and it's hard for them to relocate somewhere else
Right.
than the communities where there are families in that community they can relate to, and live a community life. So you're gonna have more of those. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Mr. Washington.
Quick question. What's the timetable for these funds? Do you know?
We must submit our pre-applications by April the 5th. So that is why the recommendations you have tonight on the criteria will develop those criteria out, take those back to the Blue Ribbon Committee this Thursday with the intent of your next council meeting, bringing whatever they recommend back to you so that we can have your recommendations approved, or our recommendations submitted to you for your approval, and whatever you approve, we will apply to the state for.
You don't know the timetable of drawing down from the state thus far.
All we know is that we have to have those pre-applications in by April the 5th. I don't know that we actually have a timeline from the state on when they'll release the funds.
Well, for my benefit, if there's a way you can help me kind of manage expectations.
Yes, sir.
Because once people hear this, there's a level of expectation that is going to be immediate, because there are folks dealing with dollars they receive, and they're trying to decide whether or not they're going to spend it to raise their house or just relocate themselves, but they're burning dollars now.
Yes, sir.
And we just got to figure a way to manage that level of expectation. So a lot of them now, they're out of dollars. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. Any more discussion? The committee recommendation is for approval. All in favor of that recommendation signify by raising your hand.
In favor, Rose, Malinowski, Dixon, Jackson, Pierce, Rush, Livingston, Dickerson, Washington, Manning.
Any opposed, like sign? That motion carries. That concludes my... Do we need to clinch it? I got a motion for reconsideration. It's been properly second. Any discussion? All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
That motion fails. That concludes the report of the Blue Ribbon Committee. Next, we have other items. Item 26, 2016, Council Retreat Directives. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you will remember, at your last council meeting, you forwarded these items on from the retreat to tonight's meeting to give the council an extra week to review the items, make sure that you're comfortable with what the staff has included in the report. And so there, before you again tonight, beginning on page 218 in your agenda packet. And I would just point out, Mr. Chairman, that beginning on page 219, there were 5 items that related to the flood. that were that were removed from the list and forwarded on to the Blue Ribbon Committee for consideration rather than being approved by council before the committee has a chance to discuss those. So those you will see beginning on page 219 at the bottom with a notation in red that they've been referred to the Blue Ribbon Committee. So
they'll come back under the Blue Ribbon.
Under the Blue Ribbon Committee's report, that's correct. All the other items, as we understood it at the last meeting, were okay, unless there have been some changes by the council members since last week's meeting, and we haven't gotten any feedback.
All right. Chair, entertain a motion.
So move for approval, Mr. Chair.
Got a motion for approval. It's been properly seconded. Any discussion? All in favor of that motion signify by raising your hand.
In favor, Rose, Malinowski, Dixon, Jackson, Pierce, Rush, Livingston, Dickerson, Washington, Manning.
Any opposed, like sign? That motion carries. Next, we have the citizens' input for items, must pertain to items not on the agenda. We have one citizen signed up to speak.
Doctor, somebody's a doctor.
It's MD. Dr. Faltos, Maria.
The doctor provided us her name and all that info prior to the meeting, and we handed it to the clerk. She wanted to have her name put on, but I do not see her here.
Okay.
So.
Okay. All right. So there's no. All right. That concludes our citizens' input. Next, we'll have executive session. Mr. Smith, if you can name those items for executive session again.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, we have for executive session under the county attorney's report, legal update regarding the Department of Revenue. Under your report, Mr. Chairman, I think there's a personnel matter. There was also under the county administrator's report a grievance matter, which also qualifies for executive session that the council has some question about.
Okay. Chair, entertain a motion.
So
Got a motion for.
second.
It's been properly second. Discussion. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. We're in executive session.